Throughout history, many nations have suffered a physical defeat, but that has never marked the end of a nation. But when a nation has become the victim of a psychological defeat, then that marks the end of a nation. Ibn Khaldun, whose real name was Abu Zayed Wali al-Din Abd al-Rahman ibn Muhammad al-Khadrami al-Maghribi al-Tunisi, was a remarkable scholar born in 14th century North Africa. We tend to think that history is a graveyard, a vast, silent collection of dead empires, broken statues, and forgotten kings. We look at the ruins of Rome, the dust of Baghdad, the silence of the Mayan temples, and we ask one question: why? Why do they fall? But when it comes to us, we like to think we are different, that our skyscrapers are permanent, that our digital world is immune to the rot that ate the ancients. But according to Ibn Khaldun, history doesn't just happen. It follows a script, a rhythm, a heartbeat. Ibn Khaldun watched dynasties crumble into dust and new ones rise from nothing. And while everyone else saw chaos, he saw a pattern. He wrote a book, the Muqaddimah. In it, he laid out a blueprint, not just for the 14th century, but for civilization itself. For centuries, humans have believed on the idea of linear history, the belief that things just keep getting better. We went from the wheel to the wagon to the car to the rocket. Surely society works the same way? We get more civilized, more peaceful, more stable. Ibn Khaldun says, no. He saw history as a cycle, a relentless loop of rise and ruin. He looked at the powerful caliphates of his time, at the Romans before them, and the Persians before them. He saw the exact same story playing out over and over again. It starts with the rise. A group, hungry and united, storms in from the periphery. They have nothing to lose. They are tough. They conquer because they have grit. They build a state. Then comes maturity. The builders settle down. They swap their tents for palaces, their rough wool for silk. Stability creates wealth. Wealth creates arts, sciences, and culture. This is the golden age, the moment when the civilization thinks it has finally made it. It feels permanent, invincible. But comfort is a slow poison. That leads to decline. The grandsons of the conquerors have never known hunger. They've never had to fight for survival. They become soft. The ruling class stops serving the people and starts serving itself. Taxes go up to pay for luxuries. The army becomes filled with mercenaries because the citizens are too comfortable to fight. The state becomes a hollow shell. It looks powerful from the outside, but inside, it's rotting. And then a new group, hungry, united, and tough, appears on the horizon. They look at the decaying empire and see an easy meal. The wheel turns. The cycle resets. So, what spins the wheel? What makes a small tribe of nomads powerful enough to topple a giant empire? Ibn Khaldun called it Asabiyyah. There isn't a perfect English word for it. Translators call it group feeling, social cohesion, or tribal solidarity. But those words are too polite. Asabiyyah is the glue that keeps you alive when the world is trying to kill you. Imagine you're in the desert, no police, no hospitals, no government safety net. If you are alone, you die. Your only chance of survival is your group. You trust them with your life, and they trust you with theirs. That deep primal bond, that is Asabiyyah. It is the engine of history. Ibn Khaldun argued that groups with high Asabiyyah always defeat groups with low Asabiyyah. It's simple math. A smaller, unified force that moves as one mind will crush a massive, fragmented army where everyone is just looking out for themselves. This is why new civilizations rise. They have intense solidarity. They share a common purpose. They are willing to sacrifice the individual for the whole. But here is the tragedy. Civilization is the graveyard of Asabiyyah. Once the tribe conquers the city, they stop needing each other to survive. They don't need to watch their brothers back. They have walls and guards for that. They start competing for money, for status, for power. The we becomes I. The bond weakens. The glue dries up and cracks. When a society loses its Asabiyyah, it loses its soul. It becomes a collection of individuals sharing a zip code, not a people sharing a destiny. And that is when the end begins. Leaders aren't born corrupt. The system corrupts them. Ibn Khaldun didn't view kings and rulers as inherently evil. He viewed them as products of their environment. In the early stages of a dynasty, the leader is just a chief. He is first among equals. He eats from the same bowl as his warriors. He listens to the elders. He relies on Asabiyyah to rule, not force. His authority comes from respect, not fear. But then comes the city. Then comes the throne. As the society settles, the nature of power shifts. The leader realizes that sharing power is dangerous. Rivals are annoying. So he consolidates. He pushes away his old tribal brothers, the very people who put him in power, because they remember him when he was just one of the guys. They are a threat. He replaces them with paid bureaucrats and hired soldiers, people who owe him everything, people he can buy. Governance stops being about protection and starts being about extraction. The ruler needs money to maintain his lavish lifestyle and his mercenary army. He builds walls between himself and the people. He becomes isolated. The benevolent father transforms into the absolute tyrant. This isn't a moral failing of one bad apple. It is a structural inevitability. The ruler thinks he is securing his legacy by hoarding power. In reality, he is digging his own grave. By cutting himself off from the people and destroying the shared solidarity, he removes the very foundation that held the state up. He sits on a golden throne, thinking he is a god, while the termites eat the legs of the chair. It works for a while, until the first strong wind blows. Then the whole thing topples over. Armies cost money. Palaces cost money. Loyalty costs money. Ibn Khaldun understood economics long before Adam Smith ever put a pen to paper. He famously said, "At the beginning of the dynasty, taxation yields a large revenue from small assessments. At the end of the dynasty, taxation yields a small revenue from large assessments." It sounds like a paradox? It isn't. In the early days, the rulers are modest. They keep taxes low. Because the government isn't stealing every penny, people are motivated to work. They start businesses, they farm, they trade. The economy booms because the people get to keep the fruit of their labor. The tax base grows so wide that the government gets rich even with a low tax rate. But then, the lifestyle creep sets in. The ruler builds a bigger monument. He hires more guards. He wants imported silks. He needs more cash, fast. So he raises taxes. He starts seizing property. He interferes in the markets, creating state monopolies that crush small competitors. Suddenly, working hard isn't worth it. Why break your back farming if the Sultan is just going to take the harvest? So people stop producing. They hide their wealth. They leave the city. The tax base shrinks. Now the ruler is panicked. He has less money coming in, but his expenses are higher than ever, so he raises taxes again. It's a death spiral. The government suffocates the very economy that feeds it. Prices skyrocket. Currency creates inflation. The bustling market becomes a ghost town. Centuries later, American economists would call this the Laffer curve. Ibn Khaldun simply called it the natural path of ruin. Fast forward to 2025. The desert is gone. We live in the cloud. You might think Asabiyyah, that primal tribal bond, is dead in our hyper-individualized world. You'd be wrong. It didn't disappear. It just migrated online. Look at social media. It is the perfect engine for manufacturing artificial Asabiyyah. We don't have tribes based on blood anymore. We have tribes based on belief. The blue check tribe, the political left and right. Each one operates exactly like the Bedouin clans of the 14th century. They demand total loyalty. They punish dissenters with exile, cancellation. They view the other not as a neighbor, but as an obstacle to their own survival. Algorithms fuel this. They are designed to amplify Asabiyyah. They show you only what makes your tribe look good and the enemy look evil. They stroke the collective ego. They radicalize the group feeling. But there is a dangerous difference. Ibn Khaldun's desert tribes had Asabiyyah because they needed it to survive the harsh elements. Their bond was productive. It built empires. Our digital Asabiyyah is performative. It tears societies apart. We are fracturing into smaller and smaller micro-kingdoms, warring over digital turf, incapable of finding a common group feeling for the nation as a whole. We are rebuilding the tribalism of the past, but without the discipline. We have the anger of the Bedouin, but the softness of the city dweller. It is a volatile mix. We like to think our character is shaped by our choices. Ibn Khaldun said it's shaped by the air we breathe and the food we eat. He was a pioneer of environmental determinism. He looked at the map of the known world and divided it into climes or zones. He observed that geography isn't just scenery, it is destiny. People in hot, humid climates, he argued they are lighter, more passionate, perhaps more impulsive. They live for the moment because the abundance of heat and nature makes survival easier. People in the cold north, they are forced to be prudent. They have to store food, they are serious, stoic, focused on the future because the winter is always coming to kill them. But the most critical distinction wasn't north versus south, it was the desert versus the city. The harsh environment of the desert strips away the non-essential. It forces resilience. It creates a hard people. The environment of the city, temperate, controlled, abundant, creates a soft people. He argued that you cannot separate a civilization from its geography. If you take a tough desert tribe and move them into a lush, fertile valley, they won't stay tough for long. The land itself changes them. The ease of life erodes their edge. It's a reminder that we are physical beings. We are not just minds floating in space. We are reactions to our environment. And as we engineer our modern environments to be perfectly comfortable, always 72 degrees, food delivered to our door, we are inadvertently engineering our own softness. We look at our aircraft carriers, our stock markets, our skyscrapers of steel and glass. We say, this is forever. The caliphs of Baghdad thought the same thing. So did the sultans of Granada. Ibn Khaldun warns us against the illusion of permanence. He teaches that the moment an empire looks its most majestic is usually the moment before it shatters. Why? Because complexity creates fragility. A small tribe is robust. If one tent blows down, they put it back up. If they run out of food, they hunt. But a massive empire? It relies on a million moving parts, supply chains, bureaucracies, trade routes, currency valuations. If one critical piece breaks, the shockwave hits everything. Look at the modern superpower. It is a miracle of logistics, but it is also terrifyingly delicate. A ship stuck in a canal freezes trade. A cyber attack on a pipeline shuts down a coast. Ibn Khaldun saw that as empires grow, they become top-heavy. The administration becomes so bloated that it can't react quickly to crises. The ruling elite becomes so disconnected from the reality on the ground that they make fatal errors. They focus on palace intrigue while the barbarians are literally at the gate. We are not immune. We are just a larger version of the same story. The scale has changed, the timeline has sped up, but the fragility, that remains exactly the same. We are giants standing on clay feet. How long does greatness last? Ibn Khaldun put a number on it: 4 generations, about 120 years. It's a timeline that feels eerily accurate, even today. Generation 1 is the builder. These are the pioneers, the revolutionaries. They live rough. They know the taste of hunger and the smell of blood. They are united by Asabiyyah. They overthrow the old, rotting regime because they are stronger, hungrier, and disciplined. They build the foundation of the state. Generation 2 is the maintainer. They knew the builders. They heard the stories of the revolution from their fathers. They respect the struggle, but they didn't live it. They move from the tent to the palace. They start to enjoy the luxury, but they are still capable. They rule with a mix of strength and newly acquired elegance. Generation 3 is the imitator. They never saw the desert. They were born into silk sheets. They look at the rituals of the state, the parades, the titles, the traditions, and they follow them blindly, but they don't understand the spirit behind them. They think the power comes from the title, not the character. They rely on mercenaries to fight their wars. They are content, complacent. Generation 4 is the destroyer. This is the end of the line. They didn't build the wealth, they just spent it. They think civilization is a natural right, like the sun rising. They have no concept of hardship. They are obsessed with pleasure, petty rivalries, and validation. They lose the respect of the people. They alienate the army. When the enemy arrives, and the enemy always arrives, this generation doesn't know how to fight. They just watch in confusion as the walls come down. Does this sound familiar? Look at the timelines of modern superpowers. The clock is always ticking. We confuse better iPhones with better humans. We assume that because we have air conditioning and antibiotics, we are superior to our ancestors. Ibn Khaldun would laugh at this. He didn't measure progress by stuff, he measured it by cohesion. He warned that material progress often masks moral rot. He called it decadence. But he didn't mean partying or debauchery. He meant a specific kind of systemic weakness. Decadence is when a society becomes so complex, so obsessed with luxury and refinement, that it loses the ability to do the hard things. It's the sensory trap. In the late stages of an empire, the arts flourish. The food is incredible. The architecture is breathtaking. But these are not signs of health. They are the flowers blooming on a grave. The energy of the society is no longer directed outward at conquest or innovation. It is directed inward at comfort and distraction. The elite compete over who has the finest clothes, not who has the best ideas. The government focuses on optics, not outcomes. We see this today. We have apps for everything, endless entertainment, and delivery on demand. Yet we are more anxious, more divided, and more fragile than ever. We have optimized our lives for convenience, but in doing so, we have atrophied our muscles for survival. Ibn Khaldun warns us, do not mistake the polish of a civilization for its strength. A shiny apple can still be rotten at the core. Before sociology, before economics, before political science, there was al-Umran. Ibn Khaldun wasn't content with just writing down names and dates. He realized that most history books were garbage. They were full of lies, exaggerations, and impossible myths. Historians would blindly copy errors from one generation to the next. He wanted a filter, a way to tell truth from fiction. So he invented a new science, Ilm al-Umran, the science of civilization, social organization. His premise was radical. Human society has laws, just like physics. If you understand these laws, how populations grow, how labor is divided, how urban life changes psychology, you can predict what is possible and what is impossible. You don't need to trust a rumor. You can test it against the nature of civilization. For example, if a historian claims a small tribe built a massive city in 3 years, Ilm al-Umran says impossible. Why? Because the logistics, labor, and social organization required for such a feat don't match the capacity of a small tribe. He treated history like a patient. He didn't just want to describe the symptoms, wars, plagues, famine. He wanted to diagnose the disease. He looked for the underlying causes. This was a massive leap forward for human intellect. He moved history from storytelling to system analysis. He taught us that societies function as systems. If you pull a lever here, taxes, a gear turns there, population decline. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. The entire engine of Khaldunian history runs on the friction between two worlds, the Bedouin, Badawa, and the sedentary, Hadara. This isn't just country versus city, it's a clash of psychologies. The Bedouin represents potential. They are the nomads. They live on the edge. They have strong Asabiyyah because they have to. They are courageous, honest, and tough. But they are also destructive. They don't build, they take. They are the raw material of history. The sedentary represents fulfillment. This is the city dweller, the merchant, the scholar. They have security, they have laws, they create art and science. This is the goal of civilization, but the price is weakness. They rely on the state for protection. They become selfish and corrupt. The tragedy is that the Bedouin wants to become sedentary. The nomad looks at the city walls and dreams of the soft life inside. So they conquer it. They move in. They become the new city dwellers. But in doing so, they lose the very toughness that allowed them to conquer it in the first place. It is a one-way street. A Bedouin can become sedentary, but a sedentary man can almost never go back to being a Bedouin. You can't unlearn luxury. You can't artificially manufacture toughness once you've grown used to heating and soft beds. This dialectic drives the cycle. The city needs the fresh blood of the desert to renew itself, but the city eventually corrupts that blood. It is a constant, violent renewal. Civilization consumes the wild to survive, only to become the very thing it ate. The cycle isn't vague, it's precise. Ibn Khaldun broke the life of a dynasty down into 5 distinct stages. It's a roadmap of decay. Stage 1. Success. The ruler is new. He is still connected to the people. He rules with the support of his tribe. He doesn't claim royal authority for himself alone. He is the chief. Taxes are low. Justice is harsh but fair. The state is growing. Stage 2. Tyranny. The shift begins. The ruler consolidates power. He doesn't want to share anymore. He kills off his rivals, often his own family or original supporters. He replaces them with paid staff. He builds a wall between the throne and the tribe. This is the moment the state becomes a machine, not a movement. Stage 3. Leisure. The power is secure. Now it's time to enjoy it. The ruler focuses on legacy projects, giant monuments, massive cities, patronage of the arts. The state looks incredibly wealthy. To the outside observer, this is the peak. But the energy is no longer about expansion, it's about decoration. Stage 4. Contentment. The ruler is a caretaker. He didn't build the power, and he didn't fight for it. He just inherited it. He thinks the status quo will last forever. He avoids conflict. He engages in diplomacy instead of war. He is managing the decline, though he doesn't know it. He respects tradition, but he lacks the fire to defend it. Stage 5. Waste and squandering. The end. The ruler is incompetent. He spends the treasury on pleasures and inner circle favorites. He ruins the army by promoting cronies instead of warriors. He alienates the people. The state is bankrupt, morally and financially. It is a corpse waiting to be pushed over. We see this pattern in corporate life cycles today. The founder, success. The manager, tyranny, leisure. The bureaucrat, contentment. And the liquidator, waste. The names change, the stages remain. We stopped wandering the desert centuries ago, but we needed something to replace the tribe, so we invented the nation. Nationalism is simply Asabiyyah scaled up. It is an artificial tribe. Instead of being loyal to our cousin, we are loyal to a flag. We are loyal to an anthem. We are loyal to imaginary lines on a map. Ibn Khaldun would recognize this instantly. He would see that the modern nation-state relies on the exact same psychological engine as the Bedouin clan. It requires a myth of common descent or a shared destiny to function. When nationalism is healthy, it acts like high Asabiyyah. People pay taxes willingly, they follow laws, they sacrifice for the greater good. The country works because everyone believes they are part of the same team. But look what happens when that glue dissolves. When a nation loses its shared story, it fractures. We see the rise of polarization, the red state versus blue state, the separatists, the identitarians. This is the breakdown of national Asabiyyah. Without that unifying force, the state cannot govern. Laws are ignored, institutions are distrusted. The government tries to use force, police, surveillance, mandates to keep order. But Ibn Khaldun taught us that force is a poor substitute for solidarity. You can force a man to obey, you cannot force him to believe. And without belief, the nation is just a crowded room of strangers. We touched on taxes earlier, but the terminal phase of imperial economics is about more than just tax rates. It is about debt and delusion. In the final stages, the state is addicted to spending. The bureaucracy is massive, the army is expensive and ineffective, the ruler needs to buy loyalty, but the economy is stagnant because taxes are already too high. So what does the government do? It cheats. In Ibn Khaldun's time, they debased the currency. They mixed copper into the gold coins. They literally watered down the wealth of the people to pay the government's bills. Today, we print money. We run deficits. We borrow from the future to pay for the present. The mechanism is identical. It is a desperate attempt to defy the laws of economics. The state creates the illusion of prosperity by flooding the system with cash or credit. Asset prices rise. The elite feel rich. The stock market hits record highs. But it is a mirage. Real productivity, the actual making of things, is declining. The debt burden grows heavier every day. Interest payments start to consume the budget. The state becomes a zombie. It exists only to service its past debts, with nothing left over to build the future. Ibn Khaldun warned that this financial engineering never works for long. You can't cheat reality. Eventually, the bill comes due. The currency collapses, the inflation hits, and the people, realizing their money is worthless, finally stop pretending to obey. We love to categorize. We have an economy, we have a government, we have culture. We treat them as separate silos, managed by separate experts. Ibn Khaldun says, you are blind. There is no economy, there is no culture. There is only Umran, civilization. It is a single, living, breathing organism. You cannot touch one part without vibrating the whole web. If you change the culture, make people softer or more individualistic, you crash the economy, productivity drops. If you change the economy, high taxes, you destroy the psychology, loss of hope. If you corrupt the government, you ruin the moral fabric of the street. This is the unseen hand of Umran, not the invisible hand of the market, but the invisible web of cause and effect that binds a society together. Modern experts fail because they are specialists. The economist looks at the falling GDP and recommends a tax cut. He fails to see that the GDP is falling because Asabiyyah is dead and nobody trusts their neighbors enough to do business. The sociologist looks at the crime rate and recommends more programs. He fails to see that crime is rising because the currency is debased and people are desperate. Ibn Khaldun was a generalist. He understood that you cannot fix a society by tinkering with the parts. You have to treat the whole. He teaches us that societal change is holistic. A rot in the palace eventually becomes a rot in the marketplace. A lie told in the capital eventually becomes a famine in the province. Everything touches everything. Ibn Khaldun didn't just study history. He watched his world end. In the mid-14th century, the Black Death swept through North Africa, Europe, and Asia. It killed his parents, it killed his teachers, it killed the sultan he served. He wrote, "Civilization both in the East and the West was visited by a destructive plague which devastated nations and caused populations to vanish. It was as if the voice of existence in the world had called out for oblivion and restriction, and the world responded to its call." To him, a pandemic wasn't a random medical accident. It was a systemic correction. He saw that plagues often arrive at the end of a dynasty. Why? Because decaying empires are crowded. They are dirty, the administration is too corrupt to maintain public health or quarantine effectively, the food supply is weak, the people are physically softened by luxury and sedentary living. The aftermath of the Black Death didn't lead to extinction. It led to the Renaissance. The labor shortage gave workers power. Old hierarchies crumbled. The reset allowed new Asabiyyah to form, new ideas to breathe. It's a grim truth. Nature uses disaster to clean house. When a system becomes too rigid, too complex, and too top-heavy to change on its own, a microbe comes along and forces the change. If you had to boil down the death of a superpower to a checklist, Ibn Khaldun gives us 4 items. First, luxury. It sounds harmless. It isn't. Luxury turns citizens into consumers. It destroys the desert toughness required to defend the state. When the people care more about their comfort than their freedom, they have already lost both. Second, the loss of solidarity, Asabiyyah. A nation dies when it stops being a we, when the ruling class views the population as a resource to be exploited rather than a people to be served. The social contract breaks. The glue dissolves. The state becomes a collection of warring factions. Third, fiscal oppression. The addiction to spending leads to crushing taxes and debt. The government becomes a predator. It seizes property, it debases the currency, it stifles hope. When people feel that the system is rigged against them, they stop participating in it. The economy rots from the inside out. Fourth, injustice. This is the final nail. Ibn Khaldun wrote, "Injustice is the ruin of civilization." When the law is no longer applied equally, when the rich can buy their way out of trouble, and the poor are punished for existing, the state loses its legitimacy. Once legitimacy is gone, it's just a matter of time. The structure might stand for a few more years, propped up by inertia and force, but the spirit has left the building. So, are we doomed? Are we just actors reading lines from a script written in the 14th century? The skeptics say no. They point to the internet, to democracy, to nuclear weapons. They say this time is different. But Ibn Khaldun would smile. He would say that while the tools change, the nature remains. We have swapped camels for SUVs and swords for drones, but we are still driven by fear, greed, tribalism, and the desire for power. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, it rhymes. We are seeing the rhyme right now, the polarization, the debt, the elite disconnected from the masses, the digital tribes warring for dominance, the sense that the old order is creaking under the weight of its own complexity. But there is good news in the cycle. Decline is not the end. It is part of the process. Winter is necessary for spring. The collapse of the old rigid structures makes room for something new, something vital, something alive. We are not trapped on a straight line to oblivion. We are on a wheel. And the thing about a wheel is that it keeps turning. The question isn't whether the cycle will happen, it's happening. The question is, do we have the wisdom to see where we are and the courage to prepare for what comes next? Ibn Khaldun gave us the map. The rest is up to us.